Dillian the Body Snatcher White here. It's a champ. Big up to Sporting Icon. Subscribe. Otherwise, I might pay you guys a visit.
Okay, so Andy Ruiz Jr., he was on the podcast with Mike Tyson, their hotboxing podcast, and he named King Kong Luis Ortiz and the Body Snatcher Dillian Whyte as potential opponents for next. Now, we can look at the two opponents and see which one's more likely and how these fights will go. That's cool. But I think he's probably just named those two because that will get boxing fans more interested. That would impress Mike Tyson. Because if he said, well, I'm actually rematch Chris Arreola, that ain't going to go down too well, is it? So, of course, he's just going to give a couple of names just to please those around him, such as Mike Tyson. But when you look at it realistically, who is Andy Ruiz Jr. more likely to fight, Dillian Whyte or Luis Ortiz? You probably have to go with Luis Ortiz. Because firstly, he'd get paid decent money, for sure. He wouldn't get paid as much as what he would to fight Dillian Whyte, but it's a far easier fight. It's far easier for him. Stylistically, it's far easier. He can go in there, get a win over Luis Ortiz, happy days, get paid quite well, and it's an in-house fight. Take on Dillian Whyte, he's in for a world of hurt, isn't he? Dillian Whyte isn't just going to try and outbox Andy Ruiz Jr. He's going to go in there and put it on him. Okay, anybody who fights Dillian Whyte, like Dillian Whyte or not, they're in for a very, very rough night. Even if they somehow get the win, they're in for a very rough night up until that point. So when you look at it realistically, in-house fight, the PBC, they don't like their high-end fighters to go outside of the PBC platform, such as Showtime on Fox Sport. Andy Ruiz Jr. is a Fox Sport fighter. They're not going to want him to go across to DAZN. Would the PBC offer Dillian Whyte the amount of money that he would get to fight Andy Ruiz Jr., say, on a DAZN platform? Or maybe Sky Sports. Maybe he'll stay with Sky Sports. I don't know. Yeah, I haven't spoken to Dillian in a little while. So, are they likely to offer that kind of money? You'd have to say no. Because I don't think the buys went down too well with Andy Ruiz Jr. last time out against Chris Arreola. So, they're not. I don't think they're going to be too confident in the kind of pay-per-view buys that Andy Ruiz Jr. brings to the table. And of course, how big is Dillian Whyte? How big would a fight with Andy Ruiz Jr. and Dillian Whyte be on Fox Sport in America? Compared to Andy Ruiz Jr. versus Luis Ortiz, of course they know Luis Ortiz. He performs regularly on the PBC shows. Now, while he may not get as much money fighting Luis Ortiz, he's still going to get paid quite handsomely. Of course he is. And it's a fight that a lot of people would be very interested in. But let's be realistic. It's an easier fight. But I still think, though, and I will maintain that, firstly, Andy Ruiz Jr., he turned down, was it 4 to 5 million? Which, of course, I told you guys this way before it hit the press, when, like Dillian told me, the kind of money that Dillian offered Andy Ruiz Jr. beforehand. Of course, he gave me permission to put those numbers out there, which was that kind of money, $4 to $5 million. And he turned it down. Okay? Now, with Luis Ortiz, not the most active fighter in the world. In fact, the only time he's really kind of stepped up, firstly, was in 2015 when he took on Brian Jennings. And in more recent times, of course, Deontay Wilder. That's pretty much it. But Andy Ruiz Jr., hey, let's have it right. He has stepped up. He did fight Joseph Parker when both of them two were undefeated. Of course, it was for the WBO World Heavyweight title, and he fought in New Zealand. He's fought Anthony Joshua twice as well. So, I mean, we can't necessarily say that Andy Ruiz Jr. is a coward. We can't really call him a coward as such, but I don't think he's as confident in himself as maybe a lot of people are confident in him. Again, he's still breaking in his training regime with Eddie Reynoso, alongside Canelo Alvarez and Ryan Garcia and Frank Sanchez and others. So is he going to be confident to go somewhere and take on Dillian Whyte? Now, if you want to look at glory-wise, it would be a bigger scalp for Andy Ruiz Jr. if he fought Dillian Whyte and beat Dillian Whyte than what it would with him fighting and defeating Luis Ortiz. Glory-wise, there's that way. But I think for me, I won't say it's a guaranteed win. Of course, it's not a guaranteed win. Firstly, it's a heavyweight division against Luis Ortiz. But you would have to favour Andy Ruiz Jr. in that particular fight. Would you favour Andy Ruiz Jr. over Dillian Whyte? Most people probably wouldn't. But it'd be an interesting fight. I think boxing fans would love to see either fight. Personally, as I said before, I think that he'll go Luis Ortiz. I don't think that he would want Dillian Whyte. Not right now. I think that if he was to fight Luis Ortiz next, get a win over Luis Ortiz, if, say, for example, the Deontay Wilder fight isn't available, then maybe we could be looking at a Dillian Whyte fight. Maybe after then. So I'm not going to say that he's definitely afraid of Dillian Whyte and he wants no kind of smoke with Dillian Whyte. I'm just saying that if you put the two options on the table, you're going to get paid very good money for both fights. Luis Ortiz is an in-house fight. PBC don't like their fighters going outside any other platform. And of course, you could say that Andy Ruiz Jr., well, he left the PBC platform to go fight on DAZN and Sky Sports against Anthony Joshua twice. Well, he hadn't had a fight at that point on any PBC platform. He wasn't tipped to be one of their top fighters. He wasn't. He literally just left Top Rank. Which is why I still maintain when Luis Ortiz and Adam Kalnakin that were offered the job to go fight Anthony Joshua, it was actually the PBC that turned it down, not necessarily the fighters. But ultimately, of course, the buck lays with the fighters. They employ these people. But for me, I think Andy Ruiz Jr. versus Luis Ortiz is more likely. But is that even a possibility? It's probably a possibility. But I think more likely, we'll probably see Andy Ruiz Jr. take on, say, Dominic Brazil or Charles Martin. In my opinion, at least, anyway. Anyway, that's my thoughts. You drop me yours, click a thumbs up, and of course subscribe, and I'll catch you on the next video.